Okay, here we are. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Paige Bronk. I'm with the town of Groton Economic Development. First and foremost, I think I want to say how excited I am. I think I've heard from many of you that everyone seems to be pretty pleased to be in person. For many of us, it's been a number of months before we've had a real meeting. Most of our meetings have been done through Zoom. So just to let you know, we had actually contemplated whether or not we were going to do this format through a Zoom meeting and ultimately decided not to. And looking at the phasing within the state, we basically went with the Phase 2 standard and trying to keep it under a 25-person limit. We felt with social distancing and masks, we actually could be fairly safe in conducting this 2-hour meeting. So we've been talking about doing this since the spring. Originally it was planned, I believe, for late March, and kept putting it off, and finally here we are. So we're really excited to do this. Obviously the state has been promoting opportunity zones. This corner of the state often will do some of their own promotions as other areas in the state do the same. Hartford, New Haven, Stanford. We tend to believe that Groton is a pretty significant portion of the state and with our employment and our growth. And so we did partner with Advanced CT, and quite thankful in having their assistance as always. Sadie here helping us coordinate for this event, as well as Courtney. So also I want to have a special thanks to this facility, Groton Inn and Suites. Normally it would be as simple as contacting them and having a meeting, but they've been working with us for months trying to find out how might we do this. And this particular property is actually in the opportunity zone as well, and there'll be some maps that give you some orientation, but I did want to thank them for helping us make today's event occur. So basically the objective of today, more than simply providing some coffee and having some face-to-face time, the objective really is to try and educate people a little bit more on opportunity zones. I'm sure most people are aware of them, but let's learn more as this thing moves forward. Learn more about Groton, learn more about how opportunity zones might be working and progressing in the state of Connecticut as a whole, and also hear from people that have been involved as investors, running their own fund, and the legal perspective as well. So I think that is the goal. And then the last real objective for us is to try and do some matchmaking. That's the real benefit in getting the FaceTime, rather than simply by Zoom, getting some opportunity for getting that matchmaking that may occur between property owners, realtors, investors, attorneys, etc. So at the tail end of the presentation, Sadie is going to help us and try to coordinate some of that matchmaking for the last portion of the event. So let me just do some brief introductions of our 4 presenters today. The first one, Mike Andriana from Pullman and Conley. Mike's been involved statewide for a number of years, quite knowledgeable about a lot of special programs. Also was the primary author of the TIF legislation in the state of Connecticut. But often will speak regarding opportunity zones statewide. I am the second presenter. I'll be dealing on behalf of the town with the overview regarding Groton and trying to demonstrate what sort of opportunities but also momentum we have, and then closing on an image of the opportunity zone within town and what might be within that with special situations. Courtney Hendrickson from Advanced CT will be presenting more of a statewide perspective, how things have been unfolding throughout the state, with a particular focus on what might happen moving forward in Groton between those that are looking for these opportunities. And then lastly, Al Pucella from cap zone impact. It's important to understand how investors, those who are running these funds, what are they looking for? How does that actually work? It's my understanding Al, although works on a number of different projects and funds, his focus a lot is on military and utility investments. So I think moving forward at this point, I will invite Mike to come up and go through his slides. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I need the fog to clear from my glasses with the mask for a second. It's great. It really is great to be here. It's been a long time since I've been in a room like this with people and talking face to face, and I think we can do it safely, so it's terrific. As Paige indicated, my name is Mike Andriana. I'm a partner at Pullman & Comley. Our primary offices are in Hartford and Bridgeport. I kind of spend time between the two offices. My practice is really kind of what I would call specialized or unique financings. I do tax-exempt bonds. I do TIF bonds, as Paige had mentioned. I work in tax credit area as well as opportunity zones here today. So I've been instructed and reminded to kind of keep this at a high level and not get too lawyerly and dig down into the weeds too much. So we're going to try to keep it at a high level and talk a little bit about kind of things that have happened over the last year primarily. So you can go ahead. I think most of you know kind of what opportunity zones are all about. Came around at the end of 2017. We've had a couple sets of proposed regulations in 18 and 19, and then final regulations that came out at the end of 2019. The whole point of it is to encourage long-term investment in economically distressed communities or census tracts, really, opportunity zones. And right now, the designations, the OZ designations currently expire the end of 2028. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of back and forth about potentially expanding the number of opportunity zones and also talk about expanding the program a little bit. There are opportunity zones in all 50 states. The way it was done originally is that you could get up to 25% of your census tracts that do qualify to be designated opportunity zones. And that was done at the state level. Basically, communities sent in applications to the state, and the state decided those census tracts that submitted applications, which ones, given the cap of 25%, would qualify. You can flip over. Here, so there are 72 opportunity zones in Connecticut, 7 in New London County. I think primarily Groton and New London. I'm not sure if there's any others, but I think generally what Connecticut did, its primary focus, I think, was more urban-oriented and trying to promote development in distressed urban areas. If you look at other parts of the country, particularly if you look out west, it's amazing how many of the opportunity zones are in super rural areas. But here in Connecticut, at least, most of the focus has been on urban areas. This right here is kind of if you could summarize the program, this is what it's all about. It is either the ability to invest capital gains that are generated, by a sale of an asset or property, and if you invest this properly through the fund in a zone, you can defer taxes on that gain through the end of 2026. And there are particular provisions that if you hold your investment in the Qualified Opportunity Fund for at least 5 years, and that 5 years expires before the end of 2026, so we're getting closer and closer to that kind of 5-year cutoff, you get to, the way it's written is increase your basis in the investment by 10%, which is effectively gives you a 10% tax break on the deferral. There was also a 7-year hold, which provided an additional 5% break. If you haven't made your investment already, that 7 years under the current rules is gone because we don't have 7 years between now and 2026. But obviously the big kicker is that if you hold your investment in the Qualified Opportunity Fund for more than 10 years, gains on the appreciation of your investment, that is excluded. And that's really the attractive part of this and the kicker and what everyone is really focused on. Okay. Given all that, I would say, and let's be fair, my practice is really focused in Connecticut. Activity in Connecticut has been, at least from my view, kind of slow as far as these opportunity zones, and it's taken a while to kind of ramp up. There's a lot of discussion, but given the level of discussion, I don't see the level of expected transactions in Connecticut. Now, as of September 2020, I saw some stats where there's been approximately $10 billion raised by qualified opportunity funds. I mean, it's significantly up over the last year and a half, but it's still, the original estimates when this first came out was that it was going to be, up to $6 trillion would be invested. We have a ways to go to get there. And part of this is, it is complicated. There's a lot of rules. My experience has been, and the rules are very fact-specific. It's hard to talk kind of hypothetically. It's a lot of times when I talk to developers or investors, it's, well, tell me exactly what you're looking at and what you're trying to do, and let's see if we can fit that in to the zone rules. Also, pre-COVID, the stock market was going gangbusters, and people were pretty happy with their returns in the stock market, weren't looking to sell a lot of holdings, which could generate capital gains to be invested. So that was working against this program. Since COVID, stock market hasn't been as great, and I think there's been a trend towards people looking to sell assets, sell holdings for some liquidity, which has probably generated some capital gains, so that we potentially could see some more activity because of COVID-19. Also, the IRS came out with a notice, which we'll touch on a little later, that provided some breaks or, that were COVID specific, that gave you some additional time for investments and construction and things like that. Okay, so a lot of this was, now we're into 2020, it has to be a post-2017 capital gain resulting from a sale to an unrelated person. We're well past 2017, so this is less of an issue now. The unrelated person, they have the kind of this 20% related person test. What they don't want is having a sale like a family business and just sending it down the next generation. That typically would not qualify. Good thing about this program, unlike a lot of programs that the federal government provides, there's no limits on the amount of capital gains that can be invested in Qualified Opportunity Fund. You can invest as much as you want. There's no cap on anything. There is a 180-day investment window for the capital gains, and we'll touch on this notice 220-39. That's kind of the COVID-related notice, which gives a little break on that. Effectively, so let me touch on a few things on the 180-day investment window. That 180-day investment is for pass-through entities. There's basically 3 different start dates that you could potentially use. You could use when the pass-through entity itself sold the asset and count 180 days from there. If the pass-through entity decides it doesn't want to invest the capital gain at the pass-through entity level, then when a distribution is made, individual partners or members have 180 days from the distribution, or you have 180 days from when, from the end of that current tax year. So there is some good flexibility there for potential investors. And also what notice 2020-39 said is that if your 180-day window ends anytime after April 1st, but before December 31st of this year, your 180 days is automatically extended to the end of this year. So if you had a 180-day window that, say, ended May 1st, you're effectively getting an extra 7 months to invest that capital gain into a qualified opportunity fund. You can go ahead. All right, investors, individuals, C corps, S corps, partnerships, trusts, REITs, pretty broad. I just touched on this about pass-through entities. You can defer the gain at the entity level or at the owner level. I think this is an important point. I think people understand this now. Early on, this was important, that you have to hold an equity interest in the Qualified Opportunity Fund. You cannot loan money into the fund. That doesn't qualify. It has to be an equity interest. And there is some ability to sell your Qualified Opportunity Fund interest as an investor and reinvest that in another fund, and your hold periods will continue. All right, this is a very simple example. This is kind of ignoring the rule, the COVID exceptions, but if you generated $1 million on January 1st, you invested on April 1, that's within your 180 days. Come December 2026, you have continued to hold your investment. You get the 10% break, so you're paying taxes on $900,000 rather than the $1 million of original gain you had. And then if you hold that interest for at least 10 years, and at the end of that time, the value of your interest has now increased to $2.5 million, that gain you made, the $1.5 million, is exempt from tax. So in my mind, it's that 10-year hold which provides the big kicker. Challenge, though, is 10 years for a lot of investors is a long time to stay in a single investment. So it's got to be the right investment and kind of the right project. Okay, I'm going to kind of move along here. So a QOF is the Qualified Opportunity Fund. That's what you make your equity investment into. Typically a corporation, partnership, could be a multi-member LLC. Those are all good qualified opportunity funds. From a regulatory standpoint, it's pretty easy. The fund self-certifies. The big test is that the fund, at least 90% of the assets of the fund must be what's considered qualified opportunity zone property, which really boils down to holding assets, that are kind of located within an opportunity zone.
So that would also include a business that is formed and goes into an office building or some site that's in a qualified opportunity zone. You can still invest in that business, and that's considered a qualified opportunity zone property?
Yes, the fund would take an equity interest in the business. Right. It would, have a membership interest, own stock of the business, and there are then tests for that business to be considered qualified opportunity zone business property. But the basic premise is correct. You can go ahead. Okay, so we talked about here's about the qualified opportunity zone property. And this is just what we were touching on. Equity investment, direct, investments or purchases in property within the opportunity zone, but also stock in a corporation, again, not a not-for-profit corporation, or partnership interests in a partnership or limited liability company. And as long as your investments in those corporations or partnerships or LLCs are considered qualified opportunity zone businesses, you're good to go. Okay, then you get into, and again, this is where we can really start getting into a lot of detail, but generally a qualified opportunity zone business is an active trader business. For example, in the regulations, there is some guidance, in a very slightly but effectively, like property which are subject to triple net leases are not considered an active trader business. But a qualified opportunity zone business, substantially all, 70% is what the regs told us, are assets that qualify as QOZ business property. 50% of the gross income is derived from the active conduct of the trader business in the opportunity zone. 40% of the intangible property is used in the active conduct of the trader business in the opportunity zone. They have this restriction on the amount of non-qualified financial property that the business can hold, which is cash equivalents, short-term debt, but there's some working capital exceptions to that. And then you get the classic, IRS list of sin businesses. How they ever came up with this list, I'm not quite sure. I'm always amazed that like a suntan facility is in there. I don't know. Someone must have something against suntan facilities. Go ahead. Okay, here's the property, qualified opportunity zone business property. Again, after December 31, 2017. So this is important because if you're an investor or developer and you've held property in a qualified opportunity zone for a long, long time, you need to. You can do leases now, but that property needs to be sold or leased in a way that qualifies after 2017, which I always found kind of difficult. So if you kind of put your money in there and were willing to hold it till things turned around, it's not made super easy for you as that holder to get involved in it. There are ways to do it, but it's not as easy as I would have liked. They have an original use or substantial improvement requirement where either the first use is with the business. The regs came out with some helpful guidance on what's considered vacant property, and if it's considered vacant property, then the use by the qualified opportunity zone business would be considered original use. The substantial improvement requirement effectively is you need to double the basis of the property for it to be considered substantially improved. You have a 30-month time frame for that substantial improvement. Again, there was some relief provided from the COVID notice. I apologize. The second one there, an asset-by-asset test, that had changed with the final regulations. There are some ability to combine assets, combine contiguous properties to count that test. I think the biggest thing here is that you got to be careful about land. Land doesn't count. So let's say you bought a piece of property with a building on it, and it doesn't meet the original use, wasn't vacant. To meet the substantial improvement test, it's only on the value of the building. You don't have to worry about the value of the land, but you also got to be careful if you're doing particularly like land improvements, site improvements, or some demo work. That doesn't count towards your substantial improvement requirement to double the basis of the property. Like, for example, site improvements, you're improving the land, you're not improving the building, you're not increasing the value of the building. Yep.
So a question, if you're developing real estate, how is this related, because it sounds a little bit, and you'll correct me, I'm sure, like when you use low-income housing tax credits, right? So you have low-income tax credits, they come into your deal, they control 99.9, or they own 99.9% of it until the sort of the tax credits expire and so forth.
Right.
And that's a whole big mishegas. But my point is that you said earlier that the investment comes in, it has to have an equity position.
Yeah.
So is it structured the same way where the fund, so say you're a developer, right? And you put in 10% of your own equity and you bring in 90% of this fund. So are they going to control, on paper, does the developer who puts 10% in, do they qualify for that, for those benefits, or is it just the equity fund that's coming in?
The developer could, if you structure it, but remember, all the equity investment in order to qualify this has to come through a qualified opportunity fund.
Understood.
So the developer could set up a qualified opportunity fund for its investment, and if it worked, you could do it that way.
Okay.
There's, again, comparing to like tax credits, you don't have the same idea about this 99.9% interest. If the fund comes in and, invests and becomes a 30% owner in the business, that's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm running up against my deadline, I know. Okay, and then I touched before that there is a working capital safe harbor, which is very helpful for like startup businesses. So basically you have, so if you have investments come in and that sits in as cash, that's okay as long as you spend that money within 31 months. This is the general rule. The work is done pursuant to a written plan, and the project will then be considered engaged in an active trade or business during that period. So that's nice, especially with startups where you might have other types of costs which you need to incur early on. Go ahead. Okay, I'm getting close. So these are some of these. I'm not going to really touch on a lot of this. So the final regulations, which came out in the end of December, and if you're interested, I'd be happy to send them to you. They're only 544 pages, so it's an easy read. But it was helpful. It was helpful because I'll just give you a little history kind of from the legal analysis. The general rule came out in 17. It basically was very bare bones. It happened very quick. There was not a lot of help in there. The two sets of proposed regulations that came out moved things on the right track, but also left a lot of questions that people had. There were, I think, over 300 comments to the proposed regulations. So when they came out with these final regulations, I feel like they did a good job in dealing with a lot of the questions and a lot of the unknowns that practitioners had in this area. So it's helpful. I just don't have the time to go through these. And then the last slide. This is this COVID relief, IRS Notice 2020-39. It's much shorter. I think it's 10 pages, so that's good. So as I said, your 180-day investment window as an investor extends to the end of this year as long as your 180 days was originally scheduled to expire after April 1. They give a break during 2020 for qualified opportunity funds. Remember, there was that 90% test where the fund had to own 90% of its assets had to be at least 90% of the qualified opportunity zone business property. Basically, and typical rules, if you don't meet that test, you have to pay a penalty. Basically, what they said is that they're not going to impose the penalty if you fail the test in 2020. The 30-month substantial improvement period, you basically got from April 1 to December 31, 9 months of tolling. Basically, that time doesn't count. So if on April 1 you were 12 months into your 30-month period, you don't count the next 9 months, and then starting January 1, you still got another 18 months. The working capital safe harbor test, they extended it by 24 months, which is great. And then we didn't talk about this, but if the QOF sells business property, it basically has 12 months to reinvest the proceeds of that into other property to make sure it meets all the tests, and that's been extended as well. So I think, all right, and that's who I am. Thank you very much. Hopefully there'll be time at the end to answer questions. If you're interested in this deck, say
we'll send it out.
Okay, okay, and thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't want your mask. Yeah. All right, now for more details. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm gonna move through my PowerPoint pretty quickly, and I do want to emphasize we will make all of these PowerPoints available afterwards. Also, this is being filmed by Groton Municipal TV, so it can be watched, I believe, through YouTube. It will be on our website. And also, I didn't mention earlier all those who were involved. Sam Eisenbeiser from the town, definitely quite helpful in putting this together as well. In terms of Q&A, I think we want to try to move this along the best we can. The purpose, as I said before, with some of the matchmaking afterwards would be to have more detailed conversations. So maybe if we have detailed questions, we can try to hold them till then, just so we can try to stay on target. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I represent the town's economic development division, and that's not necessarily a small comment to make. It really wasn't that long ago, a few years ago, we didn't have such a division, and the town has been really understanding that that's important to actually have resources and staffing to move these initiatives forward. So there is a dedicated staff, a team that works with property owners and developers in trying to maximize the growth of the town. So purpose of this slide is to give you a quick overview of what Groton is, and real simply, you'll see it on a map later on, but basically Groton goes river to river. New London is on the left-hand side of the screen, and basically Mystic is on the right-hand side of the screen. To the south on the bottom, basically you have the Sound. And we like to think of Groton in terms of nodes and neighborhoods. So we are not this quintessential New England community that has this village green and everything radiates out from there. That's not the case. We actually have these growth areas. So to the left, basically along the Thames and Groton City, we have Electric Boat, we have Pfizer. To the top left, you have the subbase. To the middle, we have what's called downtown Groton. Of course, as you can see, 95 splits Groton from left to right. Also on the right-hand side, you have Mystic. Mystic is not a municipality. Mystic is a village that's actually split between Groton and the town of Stonington. We also have Noank, and we have Groton Long Point in the bottom right. In terms of some quick demographics, not looking to overwhelm you with this, but basically we're a magnet of activity and workforce. So we look at our own demographics, but we also look at drive time, 20-minute drive time, although a lot of our workers actually drive as far away as an hour to get to Electric Boat and Pfizer. But locally, that's the first number you'll see, 10 minutes. Basically, it's a 10-minute radius from the epicenter of Groton, so that captures Groton. You'll see the population, roughly 39,000, but 20-minute drive, significantly more. Average income, about 84,000 in Groton, slightly higher within 20-minute drive. Daytime population, obviously, as I mentioned, we're a workforce generator. About 40, almost 44,000, but beyond that, significantly more. Total jobs, that would be more full-time, permanent jobs, about 26,000 and greater within 20 minutes. So we do envision ourselves as the hub for southeastern Connecticut. The 800-pound gorilla, or at least one of them, General Dynamics Electric Boat, we're thrilled to have them, and they have stabilized us for years. But locally, people talk about EB going up and down over time. Well, I think everyone knows the story these days. We have Virginia-class submarines, the new Columbia-class submarines. They can't even build the Columbia-class in the existing facility. They have to build a new building under construction right now. I believe the building is roughly 5 acres in size, the building alone. As a result, there are not a lot of new net jobs that are being generated. The most important number is the replacement hires, and I do believe that nuance is missed by most. So a new job, a new title falls within that 3,000 realm. But an existing job held by someone who might be in their 60s, that replacement with a millennial worker, we actually think is the game changer. Right now, about 1/3 of EB's workforce is retirement eligible. The second 800-pound gorilla, Pfizer, may have heard of it. It's on a 180-acre site, fairly significant state-of-the-art lab space. It is the largest R&D facility that Pfizer has. So everyone has heard about all of the other facilities and how important Cambridge, Massachusetts is. This is the largest one. It has actually the highest job retention, which is over 5 years for an employee. Cannot be said. Cambridge, it's usually less than a year. About 5,400 employees. Every single drug that undergoes testing goes through our Groton facility. At the bottom, you can see the history of drug discovery, Zoloft, Zithromask, and I'm not going to pronounce it. I'll let you read it. Next, please. Marketing. We focus, unlike what we did years ago, we actually are fairly proactive in marketing Groton. We have our own cut sheets that we develop in-house. Sam and I go to a number of retail conferences when we were allowed to do so, mainly ICSC. I mean, typically in December, we'd be in Manhattan for several days actually explaining to the world where Groton is, why it's important, and why you want to be here. We've done our own logo, which we developed through a contest. Then we also have our own website, Explore More Groton. I would encourage you to go there. It actually is a separate dedicated website from the municipal site. We use Facebook and LinkedIn and other social media. Already mentioned who I am, Sam Eisenbeiser, who's here. We also have other staff in the office that help us in actually helping us promote and market the town. Transportation. If you ask people in Groton, how's transportation? They'd say, it's okay, you know, the transit's just fair. We actually believe for our community, we have an exceptional transportation system. As I mentioned before, we have I-95, we have the State Pier over in New London, train station in New London, Amtrak, also the water taxi that serves both Groton and New London. We are actually finalizing the Nautilus Pier at something the town and the Navy's partnering on, so we're going to extend the water taxi all the way up to the Navy base. We have the airport, which handles about 40,000 flights a year, not commercial, general aviation. Nonetheless, it holds a commercial license, 2 significant runways large enough for Air Force One to land here. We also have another train station over in Mystic, an Amtrak stop there as well. So we actually believe air, water, road, we have significant transportation assets. Definitely, I'm not going to go into these details. More than happy to explain these. The purpose of this slide is to show momentum that we have in Groton. You know, in all honesty, it's been kind of flat for a number of years, but it's really started to pick up. Some of the key redevelopment projects that we have, many of them are former school properties. Groton Heights, that will be the home of a blue tech company. It'll be R&D, Thayer Mahan, for those who are familiar. Mystic River Bluffs, large mixed-use development that's on 80 acres formerly. Well, it's still owned by the state, but it's being transferred to Respir Homes for a $250 million project. Triton Square, former Seeley School property, that'll go multifamily, about 300 units. The Colonel Ledyard School, small school, but about a half a mile from EB, that'll be multifamily. We actually have a public unveiling of that project tonight under a tent outdoors. And Pleasant Valley School, that RFP's on the street right now, due next week. We anticipate there'll be some multifamily interest on that. Housing demand, similar to what I mentioned about EB earlier, we expect 3 different sources. We have the new electric boat jobs, again, the new net jobs, new job title, focused on blue tech. It's not just submarines. As I said, we have Thayer Mahan, you have wind energy, you have other blue tech companies. Then we have commuters that are traveling a significant distance that might not necessarily have been afforded an opportunity to live in some contemporary housing. So we actually think when that housing comes online, they might actually make the jump, since they're coming here every day to work, maybe they want to live here. And then lastly, the replacement workers, which we actually think is a large segment of our population. There's our opportunity zone. It is basically across the street from the Navy base. It's bounded by Route 12, Route 184, otherwise known as Gold Star Highway. I don't think this is working. Gold Star Highway, it splits somewhat the lower third of the opportunity zone, and then you can see I-95. So it's a fairly significant area, and it's in a key location for us within the town. And here are some of the key parcels. I went to an opportunity zone seminar that was held in New Haven by the state, and the state is, you know, obviously they're really hot on opportunity zones, but they typically will say, what are the projects? Case in point, Project X, or here's the name of the project and it's ready to launch. Groton isn't necessarily set up that way. We have a number of real estate offerings. They're not projects per se, but they're real estate offerings within our opportunity zone that need to be planned and I think promoted and developed into projects. So I'm definitely not going to touch on all of these, but we're more than happy to share information regarding any of these properties afterwards or even after this morning. Thank you very much. So Courtney is up next, followed by Al.
Good morning. Nice to see all of you. Thank you. I hang out with Mike because he answers all the tough questions. So he and I have done this probably 6 or 7 times over the years since the Opportunity Zones have come out, and I know all the technical questions go right to him, so that's why I hang out with him. And Paige, so much is going on in town. It's just awesome to see, so we love supporting towns that really have their eye on the ball. So our role in the Opportunity Zone landscape is to support towns and cities that have the zones to be sure that they are marketing those opportunities to would-be investors and developers. So that's exactly why we're here today. We are the statewide independent economic development organization, so we are the private sector arm to the public agency, the Department of Economic and Community Development. We are laser focused on business retention, expansion, and recruitment, and therefore supporting our critical partners, municipalities and regions, most importantly, with opportunity zone investments and any other economic development activities, all of which help statewide the effort towards business retention and expansion, as well as new business recruitment. Again, Mike has covered most of this detail, but of course the Opportunity Zone intent is that private sector investment into low-income communities. It was a bipartisan, originally developed legislation, which we like to make sure we highlight, and Mike walked us through that there are 72 in 27 of our Connecticut municipalities, and interestingly, there's almost 9,000 Opportunity Zones nationwide. He talked through that investments can be made in real estate and business, and we don't want to forget infrastructure as well. That's an opportunity that several communities are looking at because it's an interesting way for them to put the infrastructure they need to support their business community in using this program. In terms of looking at the landscape of opportunity zones thus far, of course, COVID has put a wrinkle in that, but importantly, we have looked at the pros and cons and been working with so many of the communities that are interested in making the most of their opportunity zones. So what we've really seen so far, a couple of the pros so far is, as Mike said, I think there is a little bit more detail now in the final regulations, but certainly at first and still today, most investors will say there is pretty little oversight, and that's an advantage that they see as compared to several federal tax credits and other programs that have traditionally come out through the IRS. We really like the idea that there's a new type of investor that's being exposed to different zones, and again, those distressed zones. We really think that that's a huge advantage and opportunity, no pun intended. On the con side, those same new investors, we just have to be careful. We're welcoming them to really look at these tracks, but they may not know the community or the region well, so we really want to be sure we're partnering very closely with our towns and cities to be sure that those investors have what they need to make good decisions. And just the fact that there are no local requirements, again, investors and developers have traditionally felt that that's a positive, and that probably is a positive for them. But on the community side and in that community development world, we're always hearing we just have to be real careful when there's no local hiring and affordability type of requirements there. In terms of Groton, Paige did a great job of laying out the actions that they're taking in terms of just the development that's going on in and outside the zone, and we're supporting them in the variety of ways that you see here. Managing the zone, that in and of itself is something that they have to put together as part of their town department. Identifying property owners, which of course we're here today to do, to meet you, to educate you, answer your questions. Highlighting those available parcels that Paige showed us, and other benefits of investing and developing in Groton are important, even if they're not monetary incentives, even if they're beyond necessarily the zone boundaries. It's important that you all know the landscape in general of why it makes sense to invest and develop here in Groton. And then ensuring that you all are balancing the character of your community, which is very important, balancing that residential, that commercial, that critical piece of businesses that he showed, Pfizer and EB, but all of the other small businesses. So doing all of that and maintaining the character of Groton despite the opportunity zone excitement and all the proposals that we would like to see. So we're helping support them in those ways. And then lastly, I'll end with our Connecticut Site Finder database. If you're not familiar with our Site Finder, that is essentially the MLS for Connecticut, and it has the opportunity zone specific properties tagged. So that's helpful for you all if you're looking at which parcels in and around the state are in opportunity zones. That is the commercial MLS, as I said, but it is much cheaper than your CoStar or your LoopNet. And really the added advantage of using the Connecticut Site Finder database with us is that on the back end, you have access to all of the senior economic development decision makers at the state who can talk with you and work with you on your projects and why they may or may not make sense in Groton and around the state. So that's my spiel, and I'm going to turn it over to Al. Yes, there's a question here.
Could you take a plea back to the state? We're operating in Texas, permitting 2 months, screaming at us to get our act together. The lawyers I've talked to about Connecticut, because I live in Connecticut, we'd love to do something here. Problem number one, we're an operating company. Most of you, as you mentioned, permitting. Nobody thought that you want to create jobs. Urban, so they come in, they go away. What you want is operating where we create jobs for you. What I've heard also back to Hartford is talking to lawyers, they tell me 6 months for permitting. That's inexcusable. They can't figure it out in 2 months. Maybe you ought to think about bringing a third party in. Fire. It's just, I live in Greenwich, Connecticut. Thanks to de Blasio, people are bailing out of New York City and coming to Connecticut. And the Connecticut people are getting smart, especially people I'm older. They are bailing and getting out of the state as fast as humanly possible. How are you going to replace them? All the billionaires are just about gone. How do you replace the billionaires with taxes you're getting? It's just, it blows my mind. And I desperately want to help the state. Because my anchors are, I have a son in Rye, and I have a daughter in Boston. And I want to stay here. And that's why I'm here. I really want to do stuff to help you. But you make it very difficult for me.
I appreciate that. One note that we are not the state, but we work closely with the state. I'm happy to talk with them about that. However, I will say we have been working closely with them on that exact issue. We understand that permitting is slower here. We have gotten better, especially through DEEP and some of the other state agencies, and we intend under the current administration to get even better and even faster. It's definitely on our radar, and we have been supporting the state in those same feedback from our businesses, because much of what we do is we hear that feedback and we're able to relay it to those decision makers. So thank you.
Yeah, please, keep screaming. I mean, they don't get it. If you deal with other states, Wyoming, it's a dream compared to here. The only state that I've dealt with that is worse is California. You know? And I'm also tired of reading in the Wall Street Journal how screwed up Connecticut is. We have to get our act together.
We agree. Thanks. Al?
Good morning. Thank you to the town of Groton. This is a great opportunity to come together. I have to say, it took me just a moment to remember how to tie a tie this morning. It was about 6 months ago. It was the last time I did this, so I hope it's under the mask. So if I made a mistake, I got to hide. I also want to say I'm joined here by a few of my colleagues from Capstone. Jonathan Hubert runs our analytics business. Gene Wong runs our healthcare business, and Michael Millard is one of our financial advisors. So we're outnumbering the locals, I think, with folks from Fairfield County. Maybe going to the first slide. So this is just a kind of a segue from what Mike did and Courtney and the speakers before me. The rules are very complex, but the policy is very simple. The policy for the zones are almost unprecedented in American history for equity. If you think about how we as a country change behavior and set priorities, it's based on tax. I'm a tax geek. I didn't do very well in law school, but I got an A from Marty Ginsburg in tax, Ruth's husband. So it was one of my few A's ever. But I really like tax because it is policy. And if you think about tax in our country is founded on tax, right? Some folks in Boston Harbor didn't like the tax code and threw some tea in the harbor. So, when we want to make big changes, we do it through tax. And we've done subsidizing money to worthwhile causes through debt and through philanthropy, right? Municipal bonds, you don't pay your tax on your interest. Philanthropy, your 501c3, you take it off your deductibility of your taxable income. Well, equity has been very narrowly subsidized, right? If it's housing, it's a LIHTC credit. If it's solar, it's an ITC credit. What this law did, and it came out of left field, stuffed in the December package, was put equity on par with debt and charitable giving. It's ubiquitous, it's unlimited, it's holistic, right? So you have to think about this differently, how opportunity zones are utilized. And what we've done at Capstone, we actually are a very proud Connecticut company. We're based in Norwalk, very close to Westport, where I live with my colleagues. And we said that this is such a complex group of rules, and I've summarized them here, but Mike did a much better job in his presentation. Someone needs to operationalize this. So Capstone was set up in May 2018, before even the draft regs were out. We were, I think, one of the first funds in the country. And we said, we want to be in the whole ecosystem of zones. We want to work with investors to help them figure out how to trigger the right gain and how to put it to work. We want to work with projects and companies who are users of capital who don't really understand, how do I make myself compliant? How do I advertise myself? And in the middle, all the stuff that has to happen with lawyers and accountants and wealth managers to set up the right platforms, the right strategies, the right compliance. That's what Capstone is. So Capstone is pulling it all together. We've been at it now for over 2.5 years. And what you'll see in the few slides are how we take the program, which by and large was a real estate program. And why was it as such? Because the IRS, when they got the 15-page law in January 18, they said, like, what is this? Where's the congressional testimony? Where are the draft regs? Nothing, right? This was just stuffed in the tax bill as a law. So what the IRS did in the first two set of draft regulations is say, we really want to make sure the money's going in the zone. We don't understand this rule. We're going to have a lot of conferences and take questions, but that money better go in the zone. So you can see real estate, right? It's physical, it's there, and the users of that capital are the developers and the tenants, so that they're in the zone. But what happens with infrastructure? What happens with operating businesses? You say you're in a zone, you have one employee there, your other 50 employees are in Switzerland trading Chinese stocks. Is that a company we should be subsidizing? No, right? So the 2 years were spent understanding how do we take this real estate approach, pretty much, kind of a 1031 on steroids, and turn it into something that also works for the community, for the supporting infrastructure, for operating businesses, for innovation, for job training, for people, right? It's a low-income community approach. So the funds that now are starting to be operationalized around the country, and we're active in all 50 states and the territories, are a few different ilks. Number one is kind of what we are, a traditional fund. You raise money for investors. If they want to activate a capital gain, defer and abate the old gain, exclude the new gain, invest in us, we'll get to work. So we're a private equity style fund, and we focus on zones and only zones, but across all asset classes. And if you're a fund manager, that's kind of the frame you bring, right? If you're Blackstone or Carlyle, although many of the major managers are not doing zone funds because it's different and it's pretty complicated, that's kind of one flavor. But the flavor in the middle is the local fund, and that's why we're here. Because a fund says, look, I want to help this community, this city, this rural community, this military base anchored community, this university, this whatever it is. And I think that's the interesting part of using equity to say, I can do the real estate investment alongside the supporting infrastructure and also have a job creating a set of businesses also, all together, all getting the same tax break under the same umbrella. And that's existential, that's different. We as a country have never had that before, and that's why this is so important. And then lastly is really what we've seen to date mostly in the market, kind of single investor funds. I have my own game, I know what I want to do with it, I'm going to set up my own vehicle, and maybe I'll bring in a few folks into my club. That's where the market's been, because it's been 2 years of draft regs. When the final regs came out in December last year, COVID hit in the first quarter. So until really now, you're not getting major eyes on this program. It just happened in the last couple months nationally. Corporations, insurance companies, family offices, and people who don't have to pay their tax really don't want to. So to the extent you're getting a lot of attention now, it's a good time to be presenting Groton. So maybe the next slide. Just quickly, state of the market, Mike and others alluded to it. Lots of hopes when they first came out. The IRS in the final regs talked about tens of thousands of investors and companies. I actually think that's going to undershoot it. I think it's going to be massively successful in the next 6 years. The accounting firm Novogradac, one of the specialty firms, has identified the 10 or 12 billion we talked about. The White House said it's 75 billion. Remember, you don't have to disclose. You can put your own $1 billion in your own fund and not tell anyone. So who knows what the real number is, but it's billions, not millions. Two important things happened for banks, and that's something that, again, only happened in the last, I think, 4 or 5 months. Banks now are allowed to apply for CRA credit, Community Reinvestment Act credit, which, as everyone knows, it's a big deal for banks. They based on redlining in the old days, the law was passed, I think, 50 years ago to say you have to reinvest in your communities if you're a bank. If you're taking deposits from that community, put something back. So CRA is a big deal. And the Fed, FDIC, the OCC of Treasury, all said now, if you do a zone loan, this is not even the equity side, this is how this program keeps on giving, it's not bringing debt to the table because banks now get CRA credit. So all your lenders you should be talking to saying, did you know that? Because now, part of the cap stack is going to be the leverage portion, and you're going to be able to take credit. And even more so, the last point, it was just done 2 months ago. The Volcker rule was passed after the last crisis, saying banks really shouldn't be making equity investments, too risky. It almost brought down the world economy with derivatives. But for a few exceptions, we, again, Fed, FDIC, OCC, and the SEC and the CFTC, the Commodities Future Exchange Commission, all came out with a joint rule. First time in decades, all 5 of them said, in addition to SBICs, small business investment companies, now banks can do equity in zone funds. Again, massively important, because now every bank in the country can make an equity investment as long as it's a zone deal. See, so this just all happened in the last few months. So there's momentum picking up with new sources of capital coming together, awareness, we are where we are with COVID, so it's chronic but stabilized. And I think people now are looking to where this market's going to go. But I believe it's going to be a very, very important new asset class. Next, please. So what did we do at Capstone? I wanted to show an example. We invested in a VA clinic in Minnesota. And the reason I put this up is that it had components of what we see, components that are important in a deal. Number one is, who is going to use that facility? In this case, the U.S. federal government built a spec under a 20-year lease. Really, really important, right? To say that if I'm going to put money to work, that I really want to know there's going to be a useful, off-taker or tenant. And in this case, it was the U.S. Veterans Affairs. Number two, is it something you're proud of being associated with? I mean, this is healthcare, right? This is people. This is people's health. So it's not the five-star hotel, right? It's not. I mean, this is something that the community in Minnesota really, especially for the vets who need access to healthcare, given the sacrifices they made for this country, is very, very important. And thirdly, it's programmatic, right? It's not a one-off facility that only works there. This can work hundreds, if not thousands of times. So if you're going to have this window to invest in zones, and you're going to use all your time doing one deal, that may not be as good as doing something that can be repeated over and over again. So I just want to point that out. And we had a very good partner, 18 Squared, which is a real estate investment firm we work with. We partner very well. We play nicely in the sandbox. If you want to be everywhere, doing everything all the time with everyone, you need partners. So we picked a partner, and we're very happy to partner with folks here in Groton. Next, please. So let's start segueing into infrastructure. So again, the final rules in December 19 clarified a lot. It was not clear that unless you did real estate with those tenants in that zone, that you could get the tax break. What if all your customers are in China buying your widget? Does that count? Who knows? So the December 19 regs changed everything. They clarified. Not only clarified, they offered many safe harbors and examples of what it takes to comply. Because people, are going to put money to work. They're going to spend 10 years in that investment. They're going to go to the IRS in 10 years and say, look, I put $1 in, I hit a triple, I have a $2 gain, I'm not paying you tax. Oh, I missed that box 5 years ago, or I did something wrong. The IRS is going to say, don't pay your tax. No, they're going to say, pay your tax and pay a penalty, right? So you have to be right. So when big money's moving, the law needs to be clarified. So that only happened 10 months ago, and then COVID hit. So again, what we see now are these new asset classes like solar in the renewables, data centers, and water. We see really the three, we call them critical infrastructure, digital, water, and renewable power as supporting a kind of an anchor institution. Could be a corporate campus, could be a military base, could be a university, could be a city. So we are very focused at Capstone on solar. We think it's a great sector anyway. It is the E in ESG, right? Environmental, social governance. The zones are the S, the social piece. So you get E and S. And lastly, it's very much scalable, right? You have residential solar, which you can do around the country. You have community solar, where you build a facility for the community users. You have commercial and industrial, so you move up the value chain to organizations. And you have utility scale. So again, lots of shots on goal, right? That's always how you should be thinking about this, is, as an investor, at least from my perspective. Can we do things that are repeatable and in the spirit? So we at Capstone have focused on solar, but also, we'll be rolling out other infrastructure. A lot of the components we talked about the banks who are interested, who are going to get CRA credit for the fund we're starting for a national solar fund. There are other renewable approaches, wind, geothermal, battery storage, that again, amplify that approach for renewables. And clean energy, was LNG or others, also work. And also, when you think about location-based subsidies, again, we subsidize as a country by sector, that light tech credit, that solar credit. Well, now, that polygon, that opportunity zone, anything goes. So you can start to layer in different approaches. So if you're going to have the anchor institution, that corporate campus or that military base, it's going to need water and power and digital, and maybe even residential, so you can start putting together a whole package. And what we think is very, very important, without saying, is that you're invited in. You're not there to impose through gentrification or just hey, we want to make money, and you just happen to be where we are. It's important to have a partnership with the locale. So these kind of meetings are actually more important than ever, because over 10 years, if you don't have the support of your local partners, you will fail. You will fail. Military is something we spend a lot of time on. I've been very interested in using the military network as several hundred military bases. 121 are in zones. I mean, actually in the zones. So if you're in Corpus Christi, Texas, you're in a zone. We've been working a bit with Fort Bragg in North Carolina next to a zone in Fayetteville. So the military is a great, great partner for zones because they're a long-term, they're going to be around. If they're not around, we're not around, right? So they're a great partner, and they have a lot of stuff they need, right? They need that energy and the digital and the housing and the most successful P3 that the military, I know we have someone here from Balfour, has really been over the last 2 decades, military housing, right? Using private money, building good stock on base or next to base, and therefore that model where the government is kind of the off-taker, either directly through an off-take agreement for water or power, or indirectly through the vouchers that the troops and workers have, is a great model. So we think of the military as a phenomenal anchor investor for zones. They're there, they're permanent, they need a lot of stuff, and whatever you do with one base commander, you can do a few more 100 times. And we've built a database of all the zone bases in the country, what they need, what they have. Jonathan, if you want to talk to Jonathan, he's someone on top of that. But we believe in getting ahead of this and offering a solution that has the capital. And just last thing for the military is that it really makes them more connected with the community, which is a good thing. It's better as an investor to have 2 or more off-takers, right? If someone's just buying my water or buying my energy, that's risky, right? What if that goes away? Well, if I have 2 or 3 or 4 customers for that infrastructure, much better. So we look at ways to build scaled infrastructure that has a variety of off-takers. And again, making this all zone compliant, bringing in regular way investing with the capital, increasing resilience. One of our board members is Steve Flynn, former Coast Guard commander who lives in the area, is spending some time also, thinking through a national zone strategy with us. He teaches at Northeastern. We believe increasing resilience is a very, very important theme, and we do that everything we do, especially with long-term investments. You have to make sure they're going to be around in 10 years. And the program, you can hold your asset tax-free for 28 years. You have to exit in 2047. But it's almost like a 401k. You're not going to hit my double or triple in 10 years. I'd like to have a quadruple or more, all tax-free. So we think 10 years is the minimum. Some of our investments we're negotiating are multi-decade. And then lastly, so Capstone, we see ourselves at the fund level. Remember, the most important thing I tell people about the program is the complicated nomenclature. A fund doesn't have to be a fund. It can be a company. We are a fund. Capstone itself is a QOF, Qualified Opportunity Fund in Norwalk. You can be a trust. You can be a REIT. So managing that fund level where you bring in the money from the investors down in the right way and report at the fund level and account is very, very critical because the investors now, the corporations, the insurance companies, the institutions, they expect very robust, accurate, timely reporting. So as zones now, hit the adult table, we believe that offering is going to be very important. At the investment level, there's a lot of stuff to do. You got to track the investments. You have to recycle. You don't have to stay in the same deal for 10 years. You just have to keep your money in the fund for 10 years. The company can get sold in year 3, and you have a year to recycle that money. So kind of managing all those timing issues is important. And then lastly, at the business itself, there's a lot of tracking. Did you hit your 30 months? Did you get the extension? So we manage that whole black box. So if you want to set up your own fund and do your own deal, but you want fund management, we'd like to be helpful. If you have, a corporate gain, if you have a traditional fund, but this is going to be really democratizing access to capital because any American today with a $25 LLC can be a fund manager. I mean, literally, it can be a 401k model. And I think it's going to be a retail model soon, just because, again, this is able to be used across asset classes anywhere in the country with any type of investor. So we think this is very important, and we're here to be helpful. So thank you.
I want to thank our speakers and also, I want to be explicit. I want to thank you for actually participating today as well. I think everyone realizes the value in coming together and learning about this, but we're not done yet. As I mentioned, Sadie is going to help us do a little bit of some matchmaking. I think she has some suggestions, but I have a feeling that we're probably going to lose some people over the next few minutes as we get closer to 10 o'clock. So I just wanted to make sure that I thanked everyone for coming today. You have everyone's contact information. If you have any questions that are not answered today, feel free to reach out to any of us. We'll also make the PowerPoints available as well. So thank you very much, but I want to turn it over to Sadie to kick off the last portion of today's event.
Great, thank you, Paige. So for the final portion of the event, we're just going to do some speed networking. When you all came in, I gave you a little sheet of paper that had a few names on it, suggestions for people you might want to talk to, but feel free to talk to anyone that you want. So we'll do 3 rounds, 5 minutes for each round. And so, yeah, you guys can just, get up and go chat with someone, and I will start the timer now, and I will let you know when to change partners.